Hey, this is Jacob Evan. Thanks for tuning in. As I've mentioned before, I've been working on my study of the timing of the day, when the day begins, when the day ends, and I've still been doing that, and I feel like I am making some progress on it, although it is still not satisfactory to me. I'm not yet at the point that I feel like I'm ready to share in a confident way. And so I'm still looking into that, and I've been thinking that I want to continue to keep in touch at least on a weekly basis, even if I don't have a full production ready to share. I don't have a study which I'm opening up to you at that time. And so what I wanted to do is just start discussing in brief just topics that have been on my mind that relate to the Torah, similar to what I've done over the past few weeks, but more just as a routine. And so I wanted to talk about my study of the timing of the day, and I also wanted to mention that, of course, Feast of Unleavened Bread is coming up soon, by my understanding, and I'm going to be observing the night watch as per Exodus 12:42. In the past, I didn't really understand that verse in that way, but I think it is reasonable to read it as being a night watch, and so I'm intending to stay up through the night. And the Gregorian date, which I'm going to be doing that, is going to be the evening and night of the 14th and the night into the morning of the 15th. If you are interested and you haven't seen the video about the regular Shabbat meetings, which I am intending to start doing, the first one is this Shabbat, and there's already been a decent bit of interest in it. If you haven't seen the video, feel free to check that out, and feel free to email me, and I talk about that in that video. And I intend to continue that into next week. I intend to continue that by the Gregorian date on the 16th, also with the portion which is for that date. And so now I wanted to talk just briefly about the timing of the day and what I've been looking at, some things I've been contemplating with that regard. Whenever I went into this study, my attitude was that it didn't really matter what the answer was. I just wanted to know the answer. And this has just been a gradual sort of progression for me, because I know back when I was in college, back when I was relatively early into my study of the Torah and into my study of anything considered scripture in any serious way, I think I became quite zealous at the time in defending the truth. And of course, defending the truth, that's something that should be good. And the only catch is that that's assuming we know what the truth is. And at that time, I was really quite ignorant. It's been many years since then, but really now I feel like there are still a lot of things to learn, and there are things which I could still revise my opinion on or have a new view on as I continue to learn. And one of those things could be the timing of the day. And the timing of the day, I've observed the day as ending and starting at various points, but it's mostly been centered around evening or night. Early on, whenever I started observing and didn't really know much of anything, I was going by the 3 stars practice, which of course is not textual. And then I started thinking and studying more and thought maybe darkness is the turning point, maybe the point of what would be called astronomical dusk, essentially when the sky is as dark as it reasonably gets, that maybe that is the transition point. Or I also entertained the idea of sunset. And I've recognized over the years that different issues with the calendar, whether it be the timing of the day or the month or the year, that there is a lot of controversy around it. There are a lot of different views on it, and there's a reason for that. The reason being that the textual references are relatively scarce, the ones that are very direct, at least. And so that leads to people trying to emphasize what might be deemed an implied or indirect reference to the calendar, and that easily complicates things because we often aren't good at discerning between something that's a legitimate reference to a subject and something which is maybe just reading into it too much. It's often difficult to differentiate between that, especially when we've decided on what the right view might be. So one thing that I've been thinking is that there is this fine balance between being open to the truth and also defending the truth, that too far in either direction could lead to either lack of action and perpetual confusion on the one end, or the total inability to learn anymore on the other end. The verse that caught my eye and got me to contemplate this issue more thoroughly and to entertain alternative views in this case was Leviticus 7:15. And there are a few other verses which speak similarly to this or might imply something similar to this, but this is the one I noticed, and what it refers to is the ritual regarding eating a particular offering. And it says that it's supposed to be eaten on that day, in the day that it is offered, and it's not supposed to be left from until the morning. So it uses yom for day, and it uses boker for morning, and if a person were to equivocate the first part of this with the second part of it, the part about it's supposed to be eaten in the day it's offered, and it's not supposed to be left until morning, if those are seen as two essentially equal statements, then a person could conclude that maybe the day begins in the morning, maybe it begins at daybreak. And I'm not saying that's how it is, but I'm just noting that that could be an interpretation of this. I realize that there are counter-arguments or counterpoints or verses that could be referenced or that are referenced and verses that I would have referenced in the past to go against this. I recognize that, and I intend to talk about it whenever I do the video in full. And there are also alternative ways to look at this passage other than just assuming that the day begins in the morning. And that could include just the acceptance that maybe at night you're not allowed to eat the offering for whatever reason that is. That it may not be telling you when the day begins, but just telling you to eat it during that day and then implicitly not at night. That's another way of viewing this verse. But whenever I saw this verse and started thinking about it in that way, thinking about it as a possible indication of the day, I tried to entertain that overall view and see what I thought supported it or went against it in the text. And it didn't matter to me whether that is true or the other view is true. I wanted to know what the actual reality is. I want to know what the text teaches, what is indicated by the text. I don't need to defend one view or the other to myself. I just want to observe it the correct way, and I want to find out what that is. And so, like with anything, whenever my mind focused on that possibility, then there was potential evidence that was attracted to it. I mean, just like for most of us, probably we were not raised in the Torah, and probably most of us were raised in some type of Christian view, and so we knew the Torah existed, we knew the law was a thing, and a lot of times we read a lot of these passages, a lot of these verses that eventually convinced us that the law matters. We read them before, but they didn't have the effect, they didn't have any impact on us a lot of times because our mind had not opened to that possibility, and we weren't collecting evidence of that particular point of view. So once we opened our mind to that possibility, once we recognized that maybe the Torah matters, let me look into it, that activated the reticular activating system, as far as I understand how it works anyway. That activates the reticular activating system, just like whenever a person gets a new car, and then all of a sudden it seems like everyone is driving that same car. The reason we started seeing it is because now we're paying attention to that car, whereas before we weren't. And so once I decided that I would look into that, I would entertain the possibility and see, is there really a case to be had for it, I kind of explored some of the different arguments that exist on the internet on this point, and a lot of them seemed emotional, and a lot of them seemed based upon things which I would not cite as evidence. And so that led me to just, as usual, try to exhaustively look through the Torah and also other books in attempts to understand the Hebrew wordings, in attempts to see what the indications were. And I made like a spreadsheet, and I'm going through and citing the indications that I see, and then contemplating that, seeing what lines up there, praying for guidance, and so forth. And there are a few things that I noticed, and I'll just share it for now. I'm not making this as a case or anything, but there are just a few points that stood out to me. And one is that between the evenings is a part of the preceding day. That evening is a part of the preceding day. And this is evident based on the description of the Passover, This is evident based upon the description of the daily offering, the 2 offerings which are done every day. One of them is said to be done between the evenings or at evening time, is another way it might be interpreted. And this also shows up with the anointing of Aaron offering which was done. And based upon the way it is framed, it is clear that that's considered part of the day, such as it says in Numbers 28:4. And I recognize that there are passages like exist in Exodus 12 and also in Leviticus 23 talking about evening being a part of a particular observance, which also occurs on the following day. And it might say, for example, with Yom Kippurim in Leviticus 23:27, it says it's on the 10th to the month. And then in verse 32, it says the 9th, in evening, from evening until evening. And so what I have cited in the past about this is that here it's defining it as the 10th day, and it starts at the 9th at evening, from evening until evening. But what I would recognize now about it is that for what reason does it not just say the 10th at evening? It says the 9th at evening. And so if it were the 10th day, the evening of the 10th, isn't it odd that it says the 9th? And I have a few other thoughts on that, but that is kind of a taste of that particular angle. And one other point that I've been entertaining on this is that I went through the text looking at the different relevant words, one of them being yom, or day. And it's used at least somewhat similarly to the English word day, in that day can refer to daytime, as we might call it, and it can refer to a 24-hour period. The English word day, that is. And yom, it appears, may have a similar meaning there. But one thing that I sought to do as I was looking through the text is to try to find examples where it's clear that it has the one particular meaning of a roughly 24-hour cycle. Of course, 24-hour, that's a modern concept, but one might say the overall cycle of the day and the night. And that's one thing I was looking for, is where are passages where it is very clear that when it says day, it's also including the night. And from what I have seen, and this is something which I'm continuing to look at, from what I have seen, there aren't very many examples where that is clear. Of course, there are a lot of examples where it refers to the day, and it may refer to a roughly 24-hour period of time, but most of the time that is not clear, and actually a lot of the time it is used in contrast to the night. So we have things like 40 day and 40 night, day and night. In Numbers 11:32, there's all of that day, and all of the night, and all of the day of the morrow. And Exodus 10:13, all of that day and all the night. So there is often a distinction between day and night, the Hebrew equivalent words for day and night. There's often a distinction there, and I think that could be relevant in how many of the commands are being understood. The examples which I have seen, which appear to possibly refer to an entire cycle of a day, might be Exodus 14, starting around verse 13, going to verse 30. It may refer to, or it appears to refer to, the night as the day, so that may include the night and the following day as being a yom in that case, and similarly that shows up in Numbers 3:13. At least that's how I'm looking at it right now. But like I said, I'm continuing to look into it. I'm continuing to try to weigh alternative possibilities, to try to think about as many interpretations as possible on these points, and I intend to, in the future, share my study on that, hopefully in the near future. So thanks for listening, and I wanted to mention that I appreciate the interest that many of you have shared, both regarding the weekly meeting, which we're starting to do this weekend, and also regarding the Sukkot meeting, which I talked about in the recent video. And once again, I'll be revisiting those points into the future because I want to build this up. Thanks for listening. Guard the commands. Stay focused and be tenacious.